Good morning, friends and colleagues. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 2023 Smart Buildings Exchange. My name is Carrie Mead, and I'm the Executive Director of the Smart Building Center. The Smart Building Center is a nonprofit organization located in Seattle. We launched in 2017 through the collective efforts of several Seattle area business leaders. And over the last 6 years, we've grown from our roots in the local community to hosting regular events online and in person that attract an audience from across the globe. Our growth comes from our partner businesses and their tireless efforts to accelerate adoption of smart buildings practices and technologies, our small but passionate and dedicated staff, and from the growing need and desire for smarter buildings that fuel productive workplaces, cut carbon emissions, enable grid interactive eco-districts, and promote our overall health and well-being. This is our third annual Smart Buildings Exchange, and we are excited to come together with all of you. We're kicking off the conference momentarily with a keynote panel moderated by Ash Awad, the Chief Market Officer of McKinstry and former board member and founder of the Smart Building Center. But before we start, I wanted to run through some housekeeping announcements about virtual participation. First, you will want to use the official SBX WebEx event, web app, and conference platform to navigate to all the sessions throughout the day. Each session has its own link, and they can be found under each session in the agenda. All sessions today and tomorrow will be taking place live on Zoom. Our final session on Thursday will not be live streamed, but a recording will be made available to all conference registrants shortly after the conference concludes. Most of the sessions will be in Zoom webinar, which is the setting we are in now. This means that as attendees, you are not visible to each other. The sponsor breakout rooms today and tomorrow will be a Zoom meeting where you will have a chance to turn on your camera and interact. For all your questions, please be sure to use the Q&A function. All of today's sessions will be recorded so that you can watch anything you missed after the event is over. Recordings will be available online in the coming days. Lastly, I want to give a big shout out to our conference sponsors, the Washington State Department of Commerce, McKinstry, McDonald Miller, Puget Sound Energy, Seattle City Light, ATS Automation, Better Bricks, Long Building Technologies, Belimo, Overcast Innovations, DB Engineering, ACE IoT Solutions, ALPS Controls, and BrainBox AI. Without their generous support, we would be unable to bring you this 3-day programming. So thank you. Without further delay, it is my pleasure to open this conference and turn the mic over to Ash Awad, the Chief Market Officer of McKinstry.
Carrie, thank you.
You bet.
Yeah, good to see you, by the way. And this is an exciting next 3 days, isn't it? And the SBC has come a long way. I love seeing everything that you and the team have been accomplishing.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks. Yeah. So, hey, good morning, good afternoon, and I think maybe even good evening. I understand that maybe we're joined by folks from all around the world, and that is exciting right here from Seattle, Washington. So today, I've got 4 leaders joining me who are at the forefront of their respective organizations in the efforts to make buildings smarter, more energy efficient, and to actually decarbonize both the built environment and the equipment that serves the built environment. If that's not enough for these leaders, that's probably one of 10 major responsibilities they have. So I really appreciate each of you taking your time to come in and share your perspectives and thoughts. Jon, let me start with you. Jon, you're the CEO of the Rocky Mountain Institute. So many amazing things that RMI is doing. What is one amazing thing that RMI is working on in the built environment, Jon?
Yeah, thanks, Ash, and thanks, Carrie. I'm just delighted to be joining the conversation here today with my fellow panelists. When I think about the built environment, right, we're solving climate change right now in perhaps the toughest sector on the planet. I know a lot of people say heavy industry is the hard to abate sectors, but frankly, there are about 300 global scale steel plants that we need to convert to low carbon, where we have about 100 billion buildings, right, of all shapes and sizes around the world that we have to get to net zero by 2050. And we're adding a new New York City every month, right? So we've got a massive, massive challenge. And as RMI, thinks about this and works on it, here in the United States, 80% of the buildings that we're going to have in 2050 are around today. So it's a big retrofit challenge. And we've been especially proud of some of the work that we've been doing on innovating how we industrialize retrofits, right? On how exactly we can build packages that insulate and have mechanical packages attached and finance and provide high quality retrofit upgrades, especially in low and middle income communities, to enable, right, this transition to happen faster. Because for us, it really is about, not just lowering emissions, but elevating communities. And for us, it's also a big systems level challenge. And so we've got to work on all different aspects, from the build, design, and architect through to the finance and operate sides, all the way so that we ensure that we're creating a system that supports and moves toward net zero with every possible intervention over time.
Wow, fantastic. And, I would encourage folks to take a look at the Rocky Mountain Institute website. You've got a wealth of knowledge and content up there. Emeka, you are the Energy Innovation and Resource Officer at Seattle City Light. I've known you for a while. I did not know you had such a fancy title until I looked it up. Hey, what's one thing we should know about Seattle City Light relative to how you're forming innovative partnerships? You still got him, or did I lose him? Is he muted? Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
All right. Sorry about that. Good morning, and thank you, Ash, and thank you, everyone. It's good to be on the panel with my esteemed colleagues today, and good to see you as always, Ash. I think there are a number of different things, as you sort of addressed in the first question. The climate crisis is real, right? The background that I think everybody can see behind me does not look like that today, because the mountain, like directly to my, I think what's going to be my right, or your screen right, is on fire right now. Sourdough Mountain, if you haven't heard any of the news coverage of that, that's over by our Diablo Lake, over by our Diablo hydro project. So this is very real for us. And so obviously the urgency could not be greater for us to sort of really innovate. And innovation certainly is in a lot of different ways, not just about technology, but it's also really innovating the utilities approach to community and customer relationships. And I think I say community because we no longer just think of the customers, we think of really the communities that we serve as we think about making a just transition to combat this climate crisis. And as we're seeing, of course, community behavior is really, really important. We've seen recently in California, we've seen energy emergency events mitigated by customer behavior and simply by that communication and relationship. So we know, again, whether it's demand response, of course, long-standing work in energy efficiency, looking at behind the meter resources, it's a much more interactive and interdependent energy system. And so, as Jon was saying, really thinking about buildings and the built environment differently, thinking about the ways in which those interactions will help us meet what is a much peakier demand picture. We've seen record peaks already in the last couple of seasons, both this last winter, and now we are experiencing, of course, pretty high temperatures here, and looking at peaky loads again these last few days. So, really, we're looking at a new order where, like I said, customer and community involvement is paramount. We're going to co-create really a lot of what this new energy reality will look like with our customers, build a new architecture of the grid and the energy system, and really innovate a new utility business and operational model.
We're so fortunate to have your leadership, and very much appreciate that perspective, particularly around community partnerships. I couldn't agree more. So thank you for sharing that. Lou, you're responsible for all facilities and all real estate at the University of Washington as the VP of Facilities. It's really hard to just ask you this question, because I'm asking you, what is one thing when I know you've got 100 things that we should know about the university as it relates to energy efficiency and decarbonization of the built environment. So sorry to get you to just one, Lou, because I know there's so many awesome things the university is doing.
Well, thanks, Ash. I'll keep it fairly simple and general to start, and we may dig in a little bit deeper as the panel continues. But I want to thank you and everybody here. Really an honor to join this esteemed group of panel members to address this really important topic for our nation, for the world. I'd say that the University of Washington, we recognize that we have a wonderful opportunity and really an obligation to demonstrate leadership in this space, certainly in the industry of higher education, but really in the Pacific Northwest and on the West Coast. We have the opportunity to demonstrate what is within the art of the possible as it's related to energy transformation initiatives. And what you should know about the University of Washington is we have a plan to show that and do our part and hopefully influence others in moving forward on decarbonization for major institutions. I'm happy to talk more as we go through this about our strategy, but basically we have a 5-part decarbonization strategy to transform our energy and utilities infrastructure on the Seattle campus of the University of Washington. It starts with energy efficiency and behavior, but then we have major infrastructure. We burn natural gas and we emit greenhouse gases at a pretty high rate as it amounts to state institutions in the state of Washington. We need to convert from steam to hot water. So that's part of our plan. We need to centralize our cooling. We have a strategy developed to take the 50% of the energy used to cool our buildings on the campus and centralize that cooling. We have central chillers, but 50% of our cooling load is in individual buildings that we can be a lot more efficient in. And of course, it comes down to a fuel switch. We plan to partner with Seattle City Light and electrify our energy usage through installation of heat pumps and cooling towers across the campus. Of course, we're going to need to look at what is out there in tomorrow's technologies and jump on those opportunities as they come to what we call the final push in our 5-part decarbonization strategy to leverage those technologies to get completely off greenhouse gas. And in so doing, demonstrate what is within the art of the possible for all organizations around the globe.
Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful. It's definitely a comprehensive approach and is needed for organization. I have a question for you later on about that. So thank you for sharing. Hey, Sarah, how are you? You lead sustainability efforts at Kilroy as their Senior Vice President Sustainability. I don't know if folks know you, but you're definitely a superstar, and you are excellent at what you do, and Kilroy's really blessed to have you. Could you share one reason why a best-of-class developer like Kilroy places such importance on sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Kilroy, for anybody who doesn't know us, we're an owner, operator, developer of buildings, commercial office, primarily some life science, and about 1,000 units of multifamily. So we're up and down the West Coast and in Austin, Texas. And I think, for an owner, operator, long-term holder of buildings, I think there's a lot of reasons that we care about sustainability and why it's really important to us. I think there's kind of maybe 3 aspects of it, sort of like we have to care, we want to, and we need to. So I think we have to is just that increasingly this is becoming regulated. So the energy efficiency and carbon intensity of our buildings in kind of a patchwork way in our different markets is becoming a compliance matter. And so I think there's just those kind of table stakes are there. We want to care about sustainability because more and more of our tenants care about sustainability and how their leased assets are, contributing to the climate problem or the climate solution. And I'm super impressed with sort of the level of detail and sophistication and technicality of the questions that we're seeing come through in the leasing discussions. from tenants, medium and large size tenants, I think. And it's much, much more than what it was a few years ago if it was just, is this building LEED certified? So I think we've seen a real step change there. And I think, we need to is really, it gets to kind of some of the things that we've touched on already in terms of those physical impacts of climate change that we're seeing already. And, 2023 has just seemed kind of like we're continually breaking records for hottest or driest or wettest or deadliest or all sorts of bad things. And so I think there really is this urgency for our sector to really think about and grapple with how can we drive those really significant reductions in the near term. And I think it's not just kind of like a moral need to issue. I think it's becoming a business issue too. So I think that, for our tenants, this is becoming a talent retention and recruitment issue. So as we see younger generations, I live with two teenagers, their peers who are older than them in the workforce, I think are just believing that their employers are going to be thinking about sustainability in a really real way. And that extends, I think, to kind of the assets that they're leasing, the offices that folks are sitting in. And I think as we see millennials and Gen Zs start to be a bigger percentage of the workforce, this trend is only going to increase exponentially.
Sarah, thank you so much. Well, I don't think we have a better group of leaders to illustrate how to set a vision and lead organizations to real and meaningful change, particularly at scale and with acceleration. So in a moment, I'm going to pose some really hard questions. My goal here is to stump you all, so prepare for that, if you will. Let me just share some thoughts first, particularly as it relates to maybe our considerations on accelerating the pace of deployment, which is the root of this panel here. In many ways, we're on the clock when it comes to decarbonizing. Some of you have already illustrated just how dire that situation is, particularly as it relates to what we need to do in the built environment. A recent study by the American Council for Energy Efficiency Economy, actually really paints a relatively depressing picture. Sorry to bum people out here, but at the current rate of work that we're doing to deploy energy efficiency and decarbonize projects or projects deployed in buildings, actually factoring in current carrots and sticks, in the commercial environment, it's going to take 50 years to perform the needed retrofits. That's at the pace that we're currently going. If you actually include our homes, it's 300 years. But imagine that 50 years to contend with decarbonizing deep energy efficiency in schools, universities, office buildings, industrial buildings, et cetera. I mean, we just cannot continue at a business as usual pace of change. It's just way too slow. Our industry is a little bit laggard. So in some ways, you can kind of appreciate that we can't keep doing it the way we've been doing it. And so we have begun to understand and take action to remove the harm that comes from the built environment and the systems that serve the built environment. Yet the overall scale and acceleration that will be required is going to need significant leadership, innovation, invention, and frankly, change management. We need to challenge our norms to take on and accelerate what is before us, particularly in the built environment. So that's a little backdrop. Jon, can I begin with you, if you don't mind?
Sure.
Okay, well, let's see, there's an abundant amount of research on the science of climate change and solutions for cutting emissions from buildings. The policy and regulatory environments present uncertainties for decision-making. How does your organization navigate the challenges posed by this uncertain policy and regulatory landscape? How do you help with that?
Yeah, I mean,
how do you consider that?
So RMI, we're an independent nonprofit, right? And we try to, first and foremost, we try to create certainty for the markets, right? We know a well-directed market is the fastest way to drive change. And so we do get involved in policy and we do get involved in the regulatory side. And I'll say, kind of 2 or 3 years ago, I could not have imagined that the Inflation Reduction Act was going to be passed here a year ago. And yet it was, and it has more than $60 billion and all sorts of incentives to help the industry break out and move faster, as you suggest here, Ash. But for us, policy, and if we're constantly waiting for policy and regulation, we're just not going to get there fast enough. And so we always think about, well, how do you create value, right, in the system? And where is the value? Because people will only change reluctantly at best, right, unless they see real value in driving that change. And so at RMI, we're always thinking about, we try to drive change through what we call a think, do, and scale approach. And that's right. That for us, kind of imagine what's possible and put the facts and numbers behind it, do it, right? Make a practical example happen, and then scale it. Use the market forces to drive it to scale. That's how RMI thinks about driving scale. Maybe to illustrate that best, I'll give a tale of two architects, right? Victor Oljai and Kara Carmichael, that many of you may know, who helped lead our buildings practice. They joined RMI about 15 years ago. And one of their first projects was working on the Empire State Building and doing a deep energy retrofit there that cut 40% of the overall energy use by being innovative, right? By manufacturing super windows, 6,700 of them on the floors of the Empire State Building, creating the largest Wi-Fi enabled buildings control system in the process, and giving the owner there a sub 3-year payback on that investment. They subsequently worked on this building that you see in my backdrop here that I'm standing in right now, which is the most efficient building in the coldest climate zone in the United States. And it doesn't have an internal heating or air conditioning system to support it. We basically sail the building, right? And have large thermal mass and keep it consistently comfortable throughout all seasons. And then Victor and Kara went separate ways, and Kara focused on the ESCO market and how do we build that to scale, and how do we think about, kind of supporting large entities like the GSA in changing the profile of their portfolio, where she's currently on loan to the White House, kind of helping to build out both their ambition and strategy there. And Victor went over across the ocean to focus on major scale, zero carbon, communities in China and India, and subsequently became very engaged in low embodied carbon materials. And how exactly do we make sure that the steel and cement and glass and aluminum that we're putting in buildings is built to specs that ultimately ensure that we're not creating more of a problem by the continuous construction and refurbishment that we're doing. And that's the way that RMI kind of steps in this think, do, scale mode, and empowers leaders to work with you all to make these changes at the system level that are really required to speed up the pace, as you suggest, Ash, of responding to climate change.
Yeah, Jon, thank you so much. How about any thoughts, just any quick thoughts about, and Jon, you covered, actually, by the way, this is why everybody should get to know RMI because of what you just shared. I mean, so much really great knowledge and wonderful people there. So thanks for sharing that. Hey, any thoughts about the regulatory environment and uncertainty and what we should be doing or what we can be doing to manage through the uncertainty?
Hey, Ash, I'll jump in. The only thing
Sure.
I'll add is, to a point that Sarah made earlier, this isn't going away. We have, students on the campus of the University of Washington that are clamoring for action. That's not going to go away in the near future. And I think, at least here in the state of Washington and in the city of Seattle, we have Vice President Harris on board today in our city celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. I think we're going to see more of this where government is doing what it can to open doors and create incentives. I think in the end, we have to make it easy on folks. So controls technology that can be implemented easily at the local level, at the building level, at the residence level, is really important. But I just think we have more clarity today and less ambiguity than we have had in the past. And that's the direction this is going to continue to go if you just look at what society is teaching us and what people are responding to, certainly in the United States, but also around the entire world.
Really good point. Yeah, thank you, Lou.
And Ash, on the policy front too, I think, I'm a big believer in policy. I lived in DC for a long time. I think it's really, policy is going to be critical for us to scale this up and get beyond kind of the leaders in any sectoral pack. And you got to bring kind of everybody up to a certain performance level. But I do think the policy landscape is really challenging right now, and it's creating a lot of complexity for owners, like Kilroy, where if you have buildings in all different, jurisdictions, the policy is playing out in really different ways. And, I think like Jon said, like there's a reason that buildings are the last stop on kind of the decarbonization policy train, is because it's really complicated and it's happening at the local level versus federal. And so I think that, we're trying to stay very engaged with the cities as they're having those policy conversations to bring the perspective of an owner that is committed to sustainability and wants to lean into this, but recognizes that, we're a publicly traded company. So we also have things that we need to uphold to our shareholders. And, if you just kind of put some blanket electrify everything by X date, some buildings you'll be able to do that. Some buildings you won't. Or it would be extremely expensive. And so I think that we kind of, we have to bring sort of that nuanced, like how does policy play out in reality, which is a complicated conversation to have. And I think a lot of owners right now don't have, the resources, the people power, they're focused on a lot of different directions. So it's hard to kind of track every single one of these policy conversations that's happening. So interesting time and interesting topic.
Well, what I appreciate about what you're just shared is that it can't just be me saying to electrify everything. What you're saying is it has to be a little bit nuanced than that. So I concur, and I actually really appreciate the way that both you and Jon put the complexity of the built environment and why it's probably on the last stop of regulatory and policy focus. So that's really great. Becca, can you hear me? Well,
yes.
I have a super easy question for you, but you might want to take notes to keep track of it. Is that okay? It seems like critical actors in the built environment have historically operated independently, somewhat independently. Utilities provided energy and end users decided how and when they were going to use that energy. Carbon reduction, grid resiliency, and costs are pushing energy suppliers and end users to challenge these old relationships. In other words, the grid has not generally gone past the meter and has lacked the necessary data and interconnectivity to understand commercial building loads and unlock their potential to provide grid flexibility, which you addressed earlier in your comments. The result creates this fragmented energy value chain that forces everyone to stay within their own silo. I know change is hard, but in short, buildings have meters yet are not grid integrated. Who's responsible for forging new partnerships, and what does that new order look like? I told you it was an easy question.
So I think the answer to your question is yes.
Well, that was an easy answer.
But no, so I mean, I think it's a great question. Like you said, I addressed some of this in my earlier comments. I think again, there is a shared responsibility really for creating, as we describe, what we describe as creating our energy future together with our customers here at City Light. I think for those who sort of may not be familiar with our organization, right? We're a unique organization in that we are a public utility, right? And so that means we are owned by the people and the customers in the city of Seattle. And so our sole purpose really is to bring value to the communities that we serve. There isn't really, we're a not-for-profit sort of entity. And so we really think about, again, that shared compact, that shared contract that we have with the communities we serve to think beyond that. I mean, I think that relationship that has existed historically, the sort of, hey, tell me your load, I'll meet you at the meter, has to be different, right? In order for us to do the things we need to do. There's been some both John, Lou, and Sarah have all sort of talked about sort of the value chain, and you talked about it in the question. And I think one of the things that we all need to be very mindful of is when it comes to sort of the grid itself and the fixed asset base that it takes to keep that infrastructure running. The numbers are very clear. The cost, the rates that would be necessary to continue building out the grid the way it is with the same architecture that we have had historically to meet the kinds of loads we're seeing with decarbonization, electrification. Those rates are simply prohibitive financially, especially for our customers who are most sort of at risk or most vulnerable from an economic perspective, right? So it's simply an equation that won't solve, right? And so what we have to do is really reimagine the architecture of the grid. Reimagine, as I said, the relationship. We think more of our customers as partners. And we think more of our choices as sort of being relative to the overall, as I said, sort of shared contract that we have.
Yeah, I love that as a large customer. You know, and I think this is one area where I think that better data is going to help us make better decisions. And, you know, we're rolling out a lot of, 15-minute interval data across our portfolio, which I think really helps us think from like how do we reduce that overall demand so the grid is not stressed quite as much? And how do we do that in a smart and informed way? Because I think we're asking a lot, we're electrifying transport, we're electrifying buildings, we're trying to get the grid to be 100% renewable. The grid infrastructure is aging. The mountain behind is on fire. It's like everything is kind of happening all at once. And so I think that, we really have to have that collaboration between utilities and then the big users, because I would love to see buildings be more of that solution and kind of be the energy storage, be the load shedders. But there needs to be sort of like that conversation, collaboration, and partnership and financial incentives for us to do that too, I think. And so I think that there's a lot of interesting opportunities. I'm a big believer in sort of the grid interactive, grid efficient buildings. And I think this is one area that probably a lot of people at this conference are probably experts on in terms of how we'll make that happen and scale it up. But I think it's an exciting opportunity.
Yeah, Lou, I want to hear from you. I want to note something. There is a grant that the DOE provided to 12 entities across the country that was titled Connected Communities. We and particularly one of the companies that we own in partnership with Avista, a utility called EDO. Actually, EDO got the grant to actually do this work around grid interactive buildings in Spokane, where we're extending the effort across 4 neighborhoods. And I think, Emeka, to your point, part of the rationale there is because as you make buildings more efficient, and Sarah, to your point, as you electrify, you got to think very differently about how all those interactions work. And you can't create a disparity between the community. You can't actually, that's why it's called connected communities and not just grid interactive buildings, because you could actually have a negative ripple effect on those that don't have the money to spend on new systems, new solar panels, new controls. And so, yeah, it's a new thoughtful way. So I'm proud of the efforts that are going on all across the country on this topic. Lou, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't really have anything new to add to what Emeka and Sarah just said, but I just want to tag on and say what they presented here in response to your question resonates deeply. I think it comes down to we're all in this together and we're all connected. It starts with each entity holding itself accountable for doing our part. And we're absolutely dependent on strong partnerships. I mentioned we've got this 5-part decarbonization strategy for the University of Washington campus. We emit over 86,000 metric tons of CO2 into the atmosphere every year, and we've got state mandates that we're paying money to the state as a penalty, if you will, for that greenhouse gas emission rate. We've got a great strategy in place, but a big part of it is centered around converting to electricity and benefiting from the hydroelectric power that Seattle City Light provides us. Well, we realize that as everyone is trying to do that, we have to control our demand. So it comes down to centralizing our cooling across our campus. We can cut our cooling load significantly down. It comes down to behavior. Our energy use intensity is probably more than twice it should be. And we have efforts in place to implement systems, but also implement behavior change and culture change that has everybody in every building thinking about turning the lights off when they leave the office space. But we need to convert to hot water. It's very expensive. It takes a lot of natural gas today, electricity tomorrow. If we were to continue delivering steam to heat and cool our buildings, we've got to convert to a more efficient hot water loop. So we're trying to find investment opportunities to do those things to reduce our demand and partner with Seattle City Light to enable electrification of our campus. But it's going to take partnerships with the city of Seattle, environmental groups, the tribes, the state, public-private partnerships, et cetera, and with our generous donors. We've got to get them excited about the opportunity for the university to demonstrate that art of the possible for the future.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on Emeka's, observations and situation, the practical, kind of experience of Lou and Sarah's, aligned thoughts. This is solving this issue. Eisenhower once famously said, right, if you can't solve a problem, enlarge it, right? And if we need to increase the capacity of the grid, part of that solution is absolutely going to be balancing it differently and creating, kind of transactive markets and feedback from whether it be demand response, whether it be dynamic charging systems, whether it be, kind of longer term, kind of planning for loads and load management. Those things all need to be integrated in. And fundamentally, that's a change in the way that we engage in, kind of both the market as well as the expansion of the market here going forward. And we do need to talk differently, right? We need to, have de-silo, as you suggested, Ash, in the process here. That's something that RMI, kind of tries to do as this independent nonprofit, but even more so today, if we think about the challenges, transformation is going to be attendant upon having these cross-functional, cross-community dialogues that engage and ensure that the direction that we're heading benefits everyone, and we don't kind of create unforeseen additional challenges in the process of trying to solve one. And so, I could give practical examples from RMI, but I think this one around the grid and how exactly do we facilitate, we can't just build a 2 or 3-fold bigger grid everywhere in the country. We must actually change the way that we interact with the grid and create those dynamic buildings that can store and charge, use, the EVs that are coming online, think about, in the end, industrial capacity differently in data centers, et cetera, and create the incentives that allow us to optimize across the many different pieces that we now have at our fingertips, especially through digitalization.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you. And I really appreciate that. And I appreciate the perspective that you all had on that topic. I do think it's complicated, but I do think that the current boundary conditions need to be dropped so that we can collaborate differently. Lou, you brought that up relative to partnerships, and I appreciate that. Lou, can I go back to you? I got a question. I know you've got a very wonderful team, people like Norm Mentor and Dave Woodson and others. And I remember, during the early days of energy efficiency, a friend of mine, Casey Golden, would say, energy efficiency is a lunch you get paid to eat. I'll be honest with you, every time he said that, it took me a while to really understood that because, sometimes he said it during breakfast. So I got a little confused, but I got over it and figured it out. And he's right, simple lighting retrofits are pretty good. They have good returns and they generally still work that way. But you mentioned something, that is interesting, to really push, there's going to be new technologies. Things are more complicated. We're in a more complex era. relative to achieving more ambitious goals. And these approaches, are available, new technologies, new funding approaches, IRA grants, or grants stemming from a variety of different IRA sources. I believe we need to be more aggressive in our collective deployment of deep energy efficiency. And I'm wondering, how does a complex organization like yours approach forming a plan and taking on deep energy efficiency, sir? Lou, you're muted, I think.
Yeah, I just noticed that. Sorry about that. Thanks, Ash. It's a great question. It's a really tough question, but it's frustrating for all of us, isn't it? Simple lighting retrofits, yeah, they're easy. They're easy because they don't cost a lot. And you can throw some money at simple building by building retrofits to reduce energy use intensity. And they're great. And we need to continue doing them. But to really move the needle on decarbonization and energy use reduction, it takes big investment. And anything that takes big investment takes compelling leadership decision-making to invest in this thing instead of that thing. So that's the challenge for all of us. But it's frustrating because the technology is there. The solutions are there for us to make a bigger difference than we're making and to accelerate progress. And we've been slow to move forward fast because every organization, every institution has a budget and they have decisions to make and they have big plans to do great things with a limited budget. So in the end, it comes down to compelling leadership decision-making to invest in major decarbonization initiatives. I mentioned a lot about where the university is coming from in this space. In the end, it does come down to establishing and reinforcing this culture of accountability and care. And your question is on capital planning. And again, I talked about priorities in capital planning. There are so many other high priorities that compete with our decarbonization initiatives. There's no lack of interest to pursue these great climate action initiatives, but there is a lack of funding to do that as well as all of the other things that we want to do. Mm-hmm. So, we all become marketers in essence within our own organization, and that is absolutely a big part of our jobs. Mm-hmm. Because what we're trying to do is inform, educate, and help leaders have the information at their disposal to make the smartest decisions and to take advantage of the opportunities that would otherwise go unmet. And I mentioned up front, the university sees it as having a really unique role in the space as it relates to higher education institutions and being, kind of an entity that has the attention of the public in the Pacific Northwest. The extent to which we can lead in this space and implement and show the way, we're excited about that because not because we want the spotlight necessarily, but we are a higher education institution that we're in the business of learning and teaching, doing cutting edge research to solve the problems of tomorrow, serving the healthcare industry, and really creating a public service for the University of Washington. It's all about making impact. And this is a space where we feel we have the opportunity to make an impact if we can, over the next 5 to 7 or 8 years, call it a decade, demonstrate clearly acceleration of this initiative. We've got a 5-part decarbonization strategy. Happy to dive deeper on that. But it took compelling leadership to make decisions to include this information, this investment in our capital plan. We have a 5-year capital budget, and it took leveraging our communications experts to create visual tools that make it simple. Not that it's entirely technically complex for everyone, but putting the plan on one chart and showing here's what each part of our strategy will do to energy use intensity and to greenhouse gas reduction. Here's what it will do to reducing the electrical demand for our partnership with Seattle City Light. Here's what it also does to overcome the big problem we have with deferred maintenance with our utility infrastructure. And we were able to show that. We took leadership, including our regents, as well as legislators, through a 90-minute steam plant tour, where we had these visuals up that explained with relative simplicity what we needed to do, how much it was going to cost, and what our plan was over what timeline. And I think we've got the attention of leaders at the University of Washington. We're moving forward on reducing the 93% of greenhouse gas scope 1 and scope 2 emissions that come from our utility infrastructure. That's now part of our capital plan and budget. But it also took a little bit of legislative change. We had some mandates from the city and the state with regard to building performance standards to reduce energy use intensity. And this last cycle, we were able to get legislative change that allowed us to report on district energy solutions as opposed to a building by building approach that would have really taken our attention away from doing the most good in the fastest manner. But I'll see if that generates any other thoughts.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing from others. By the way, that's great, and I think that's a master class on how complicated it is in an organization like yours, where it's not just about the good technical idea, but it sure does take a lot more collaboration, stakeholder management, coalition building, finding the funds. I mean, it's not as easy just to say, well, I don't really understand why you're not doing more. There's a lot of other responsibilities the university has. And I think every complicated organization has similar challenges. So thank you for sharing that. I hope folks took note, because I think that's kind of what leadership is all about, is leading into the unknown, the way that you just articulated. Emeka, you got a thought there, my friend?
Yeah, I'll just maybe jump in on this one, because I think this is another one of those important places for us to really talk about sort of how the transition plays out. I think, energy efficiency investments, as we think about this, again, relative to the communities we serve, it's important to recognize that these impacts are sort of multi-layered, right? And so you think about not just, energy efficiency sort of as, as I believe now Commissioner Golden says, the lunch you get paid to eat, right? And sort of this resource that we have to have and we have to invest in order to sort of meet the energy demand of the future. But also there is an imperative relative to the service that people receive. The access to these programs for all of our customers, all of the folks, when I think about our customer base as an example, we have about somewhere in the neighborhood of 35,000 people enrolled in our utility discount program. But we estimate that probably the eligibility, that's an income qualified discount program that offers 60% discounts on energy bills to income qualified customers. We estimate there are probably 90,000 customers who are in our service territory who are eligible for that. So if you do the math, we have just shy of 500,000 customers at this point at City Light. So we're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of close to 20%, right? 1 in 5 of our customers potentially who would qualify for this discount from an income perspective. So it isn't true, of course, that you drive up to the King County border and someone hands you a 6-figure job in a tech company, right? We've had plenty of communities and customers in our communities that are definitely having to roll really hard to make ends meet. And so how do we use these programs, these energy efficiency programs, these demand response programs as energy management programs? Lou talked about sort of how you manage that energy usage and intensity. I think there also is an imperative there to ensure that our most economically vulnerable customers have an opportunity to also leverage these tools as a way to manage their own energy burden.
That's great. Thank you. Hey, for the sake of time, can I move Sarah to you? Is that okay? I've got a question for you. So The commercial real estate marketplace right now is, I don't know, I'm curious. I mean, sometimes I hear it's in shambles and sometimes I hear that it's challenged, but let's just assume there's lots of challenges today for owners and managers of commercial properties. So how do we balance the short-term necessity of the real estate market relative to what's currently going on with regard to an imperative to continue to progressively and significantly reduce carbon and improve energy efficiency, particularly when vacancy rates are so high? Sarah, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a complex time right now for building owners, especially commercial office owners. I strongly believe any successful sustainability program is going to support business growth and success versus stifle it. So, I think that's kind of the lens through which I've always approached this. And so I think we're seeing that play out in real estate more and more. I've already mentioned kind of the leasing environment. I think the office vacancy is making a lot of headlines now. I think it's maybe a little bit more nuanced. I think, there's been some interesting studies that have shown that 20% of vacancy is really concentrated in kind of some lower quality Class B, Class C buildings that are older, that lack amenities, that aren't by transit, that might not have good daylight, kind of like generally aren't places that all of us would love to work. And so I think that the kind of like headline of vacancy is kind of like maybe we should retire early some of these older assets. So I think sustainability and kind of all of the features that make buildings efficient and great places to work line up a lot with the sustainability and health and wellness stuff that we're doing. And so I think if you think about the flight to quality, which is something that we talk a lot about seeing play out in our markets, I think that we're going to see more and more. We are seeing, I think this trend will continue of seeing kind of highly sustainable buildings being kind of in that high quality bucket, which is where tenants want to be. So in terms of kind of how do we balance, the business priorities and our work to decarbonize, I think it's a lot about looking for win-wins in terms of cost. And these are going to run out at some point. So you can't kind of keep picking low-hanging efficiency fruit forever because it doesn't always grow back. But I think that, investing in really good data, I think is kind of the first thing. And then using that data in a way that makes sense. So not just getting data for data's sake, but, I think a lot of what we can do to reduce demand and improve efficiency is through stuff that already exists. It's almost like a people problem. So a lot of times, we'll look at the building controls. What's the default setting that it's been set at for the last, 5 or 10 years? How do we rethink that in light of kind of how the grid is acting right now and where the grid meets? So I think that there's a lot of ways that we can line up doing the right thing in terms of energy and then correlate that with cost savings, which is clearly super important right now. And then I think just, kind of going back to the policy piece, kind of paying attention to that and making sure that there's like some flexibility and there's some understanding that different buildings are going to respond to policy in different ways. And so I think it's kind of looking for the ways that we can talk about improving the bottom line of our company by kind of doing the right thing for the environment and for the grid overall.
Really wonderful. And it makes great sense to me. We've got 7 minutes left. And although I'd love to hear additional folks' perspective on that question, I'd like to move to the lightning round. Is that okay with everybody, just for the sake of time and respect of the next panelists? Jon, can we start with you, sir? And this is a question that I would like to ask each of you, same question. So maybe be aware. Change is difficult at all levels. We've talked about that. And I think we have generally known that, we might expect at the best at first, the most aggressive things that we could possibly get done. But quite often it happens much more incrementally, and we don't really, as I mentioned at the start, don't have the time to do things incrementally because of the major concerns that, of course, we're having, mountains on fire kind of things. So I don't know, from a leader's perspective, what advice do you have for senior leaders relative to incremental change versus the type of change that I think we need to have around these topics? that will allow us to scale and accelerate the change that's needed. What are your thoughts, sir?
Yeah. Well, I do, I think change can happen much faster than we imagine, right? There's a wonderful quote from Ernest Hemingway's Sun Also Rises, where one main character is looking at another and says, well, how'd you go bankrupt? And the second responds, gradually, then suddenly, right? And we're at that moment right now in the energy transition where things are moving very quickly, right? For 95% of the people on the planet, solar is the cheapest new form of energy, kind of available. The price of batteries has dropped by 90% over the last decade. We're moving, kind of at scale now on heat pumps. We're shifting, kind of how we think about mobility and its relationship to all of those things start to move tectonically the industry, right? And change kind of the way in which buildings serve, tenants, owners, occupiers, constructors. So fundamentally what's being asked of buildings is shifting. And if we don't understand, kind of the scope and scale of how the economics are shifting, we can miss that narrative, we can miss that story, and we can fail to see, kind of what exactly is happening here, and fail to see that, net zero buildings aren't just, kind of likely here for a regulatory reason, but they're going to be profitable eventually. They're going to be the ones that are necessary, right, in the future to deal with a grid that can expand further, or, kind of different elements and requirements of customers and tenants. Those are things that as a leader, you have to be aware of, right? You have to be aware that fundamentally the world is shifting very quickly right now, especially on the energy supply and technologies that we use. And so the built environment must follow quickly, even if it is, as we've noted earlier, a bit of the laggard in the change process. The change is tectonic, it is complete, and so be ready.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you, John. Lou, what about you? What advice do you have for leaders?
Yeah, I do think the built environment is a laggard historically. I think that we are at an inflection point where there is an acceleration of awareness and appreciation with respect to the impacts and the opportunities we have in this space. I think we're seeing that it might continue to be a little bit slow, which is not good. But again, I just go back to what I said just now. Each of us need to do our part. And as leaders in facilities or whatever in this space, we need to work within our organizations to compel leadership decision-making, to seize those opportunities. And that takes a little bit of marketing internally. But externally, I think as we are bending this curve at the inflection point, what I think about is, our role here as a higher education institution deals with cutting edge research. And I do think the opportunities will start to open up. They need to, we need to blow the doors wide open on research and create those new technologies of tomorrow that are able to be implemented easily and more cost effectively by a wider group of organizations and the population. I think that will happen, but we need to keep our foot on the gas and accelerate this slope change on the inflection point to really blow it wide open. I think we're at that point right now. We've been extremely slow for the last decade plus, but we've got an opportunity now that we can't waste. And once we turn that corner, which I think we are, with awareness and appreciation for the need and the opportunity, some new technologies from that appreciation will come about, and we'll be able to move forward a lot more quickly in the next year than we did the last decade.
Yeah, thank you, Lou. Sarah, what do you think?
I think so. Three things: educate, embed, and empower. So we need to educate our employees. We need to embed sustainability, people whose job titles don't have sustainability need to feel like they're accountable to this, and empower them to make the right decisions that get us rowing in the right direction.
Thank you. Mecca, what do you think?
Yeah, just to brief, since we're out of time, I mean, I will say it's important to recognize that change, transformative change, that need not be revolution. It can be evolution, but it can also start with very simple things. And so making sure that as a senior leader, that leaders within your organizations and contributors have a clear eye on what's driving change, right? And there is nothing more dramatic than nighttime pictures of a burning mountain to do that.
I like that. Thank you all. Wonderful. And I really appreciate this panel. This was excellent. Thank you. And I know we're just at 10 o'clock. Carrie, right back to you. Thank you, John, Sarah, Emma, and Lou. Thank you.
That was awesome discussion. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate you lending your time and expertise to us. The conference will now adjourn to sponsor breakout rooms for the next 30 minutes. These should be visible in the WebEx event platform. But if you have any issues locating them, or if you have any problems throughout the conference, please go to our conference website, sbxconference.org, and look at the agenda page. We have contact information for people who can help you. And don't forget, these will be Zoom meetings where you can interact with our sponsors and with one another. Thanks so much for tuning in.